welcome everybody. Hello, this is Just Ask Julia, where we share tips, tricks, and trends to help you transform your career and elevate your success. I am Julia Holian, and I will be leading today's presentation on discussing compensation. Now, if you are watching our session live today, we will have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, so feel free to stay on and ask us questions about anything. It could be about this topic. It could also be about resumes or LinkedIn or interviewing or networking, anything that comes up for you, anything career related. If you're watching on our recording on our YouTube channel, you can feel free to click the link in the description below, and you will be able to sign up for future Just Ask Julia sessions where you can see the content that we're presenting and, of course, ask us questions. So let's get started. So I wanted to talk about compensation because I know people are really gearing up to interview. They want to get new jobs in this year. Some of you are in jobs in companies and you're like, how do I talk about compensation? How do I go to my boss? So we're really going to be gearing this more towards the person who's interviewing for another company, but the principles all apply even if you're within a company. So we'll touch on that. But there's a lot of the details that we're going to cover that will be universal. So our agenda today is to talk about, we're going to talk about what's on the table. I mean, what are the components of compensation? We're going to talk about kind of when does that conversation even start? There are so many questions around, do I bring it up? Do they bring it up? When do I talk about it? How do I talk about it? And we're going to cover those things. We're going to also talk a little bit about some of the interesting pay transparency and salary history laws that have been enacted across the country. We're going to talk about some of the research that you should put into understanding compensation before you have conversations. We're going to then talk about how do you even ask about compensation. I'm going to give you some word tracks for stating what you want, and then some other strategies and things I want you to keep in mind. So starting with what is on the table, there are some things that everybody knows about. There's your base salary, there could be bonuses, there could be equity. I think most people are familiar with that, but they may not always know that there are other things that you can negotiate depending on the circumstances of your sort of entry into the job, or even if you are in the job and maybe you are taking a promotion or you are moving around in the company. So beyond salary and the bonuses and those, the stock, equity, the long-term incentives, there are aspects of retirement that you can sometimes negotiate. So for example, I have a client right now who is returning to a company that she used to work for. So she'd worked at a company for a long time, left for a couple of years and worked someplace else, and now she's going back. And one of the things that she negotiated was that she would step back into the retirement with the total number of years that she had before. So that helps her vesting into that retirement program. So sometimes you can pick those things back up. You can also negotiate time off. This is probably one of the most common, and people know about that, but if you are used to having 4 weeks of PTO and the company is only offering 3, that's something that you can leverage, and you can, mention to them, I've really come accustomed to having, 4 weeks PTO, and that would be really important to me. Let's talk about how we can incorporate that into my compensation package. Notice what I just said there. I didn't say, let me know if we could do it. I think you have to go into it with a little bit more certainty, saying, let's talk about how we can incorporate that in. That language, that confidence of there's a way we can make this happen, subliminally does a lot in your conversation. So you're going to notice that when I'm talking about different aspects of the discussion today. Did you know that some companies, if you don't take their medical benefits, let's say you're on somebody else's plan and you don't need to take their benefits, did you know that some companies will actually pay you compensation because they aren't having to pay out in benefits? So for a lot of companies, what they pay out in benefits is, a significant percentage of what your annual income would be. I've heard everything from, 13 to 30% of your annual salary is actually what they pay out in benefits. You're not going to net that back, but you might be able to negotiate that if you aren't taking their medical and their dental and their vision and all of that, that you might be able to increase your income by, a few $100s per paycheck. So that's something that you could bring up. Tuition and coursework reimbursement. If you haven't thought about this, maybe you've already got your degree, you're not going back to get another degree, or maybe you do want to do that, you can talk to them about tuition reimbursement. But if they don't offer that, if that's not kind of in their list of tuition reimbursement, you can still negotiate and say, I want to pursue certain certifications, I want to take certain classes, would like a guarantee that I can be reimbursed for that coursework. You're probably going to have to negotiate a certain amount, like, sort of a cap on that. Most companies have a cap, but you could say, this is how I'm going to be much more successful in the job. So let's talk about how I could pursue those certifications or that coursework, and what the company could offer as a reimbursement for that. Commuter benefits, childcare benefits. There are different types of plans out there, so you could negotiate that. Healthcare, or I'm sorry, not healthcare, fitness and health club. You could often negotiate to have some kind of reimbursement on that as well. And then there's also some deferred compensation plans that executives have that you could negotiate as well. But this kind of gives you a nice list to know that there are all these things that could be on the table. So don't be shy about asking for more when you are considering that next job. So getting started on the conversation, where does this start? So if you're talking to external recruiters, most of those recruiters are going to talk about compensation pretty much right from the start. So you don't have any issues, but you don't have to hold back on asking them, what is this company looking to pay? What does the compensation package look like? There isn't an external recruiter out there that is going to present you for a job without knowing what you would consider. I was an external recruiter for years. And when I would talk to the company, I always knew what they were looking to pay and what the components of that were. And then when I was talking to a candidate, I had to make sure that we were kind of in line. If we weren't in line, I would have to go back to the company when I was going to present this candidate to that company. I would have to tell them, look, I've got a candidate I really think you should look at. She or he has, A, B, C, D, and E. They're exceptional in these areas. This is why I think this person would be a fantastic fit for the job. I do want to let you know that their compensation expectations are above what you shared with me. So I want you to know that up front, but I think they're worth it. That's how I would be presenting somebody. But you need to know that you can ask all the questions you want with external recruiters. A really good external recruiter is very transparent. I say this having been in that chair for over 20 years. The good external recruiters are like, yep, let's lay it all out there and talk it all through, because ultimately they want to fill that position. They want to find the best candidate. They don't want any surprises or hiccups at the end, so they're going to entertain that conversation. Now, internal recruiters, which are usually on that HR or talent management team, that kind of differs. I would say a lot of them today are asking the question pretty early on. I hear it sort of depends on the state, and we'll talk about states in just a moment, but most internal recruiters will start the conversation a little bit sooner. Could be in that first conversation. It could be when they are coming back to you and saying, yes, the manager wants to meet with you. And at that point, they might cover it. But this is also I think the ideal person to ask your questions to. This internal recruiter is going to be a little bit of your guide and how things are going to go through the interview process. This is probably the safest person to launch into having a conversation about compensation. When it comes to managers and executives, they kind of tend to stay out of that. They might get into it later on, way down the road of the interview process. But most of the time, the managers and the executives stay out of it. They kind of let somebody else handle it. That doesn't mean that you couldn't have a conversation with them or you couldn't ask them, but I think you're usually a little bit safer if you're talking to the internal recruiters or whoever that HR person that's kind of navigating or managing the whole interview process. So how will you be asked? Now, there's some differences in how you'll be asked about compensation depending on your state. We're going to talk about states in just a moment, but let me just say the typical questions that we hear today are, what are you looking for? What would you expect? What would it take for you to leave your current company? So if you're currently working, they might want to find out, what would it take to leave? They might ask you, what are you currently earning? But that's going to be in states that don't have pay transparency laws or salary history laws in place. I find that a lot of companies are trying to err on just the open-ended question of, what are you looking for? What are you hoping for? What are you expecting? But whoops, hang on a second. Before you answer, gosh, wait, why did it just flip? Before you answer, I want you to consider a few things. First, was the compensation disclosed on the job posting or wherever you saw the position description? So when you know what they've already disclosed, that's really helpful to kind of launching into the conversation. So do they have it disclosed anywhere? You're going to find that a lot of companies are starting to post it, even if they don't have pay transparency laws in their state. And you will also find that in LinkedIn or sites like that, I know that when a company is using LinkedIn Recruiter and they are posting their job, there's a field on there for them to put in what the salary range could be. That can be a little different than what they put on the job description. So you might have to look at those two places. Do you know what they may have paid for other roles? So maybe you've interviewed at this company before, so you have a little bit of background maybe on what the company's paid in the past. Do you know maybe even other people who are in that company and what they've already earned? So if you have a little bit of intel on what's going on in the company, that might be helpful. But I think one of the key things is to know is, does this company reside in a state where they have pay transparency or salary history laws, or are you in a state that has pay transparency or salary history laws? What I mean there, and the difference being, you could be in California, which has these laws, but you might be talking to a state that doesn't have those laws. And actually, that state has to honor you based on where you are. So kind of an interesting mix there. Sometimes you have to educate people when they ask you and say, well, actually, I'm in a state where we have these laws, so we don't typically disclose things that way, and then you can launch into it. But most importantly, I would always do a little bit of research when you are you're going to go into any kind of a compensation discussion. So we're going to talk about what that research can look like. But let's start with the pay transparency and salary history laws. So California is often, excuse me, often a leader in anything that's employment related. 2018, they came out with a salary history law that was put on the books, which basically says that nobody can ask you what you have earned in the past. They can't ask you about your current job, your most recent job, or any job you've been at in the past. This was designed to help people who may have been underpaid, particularly women and minorities, be able to level up and make companies not try to give you an offer that's based on what you've earned in the past. Because for those of us who have been around for a while, we all know that companies would say, what are you currently making? And let's say you say, I'm making 100,000, and the salary that they are budgeted for is 120 to 130. And they're like, cool, we're going to offer you 110,000. It's a win-win. You get more than what you're currently making. We don't have to pay what we were actually planning on making. And that's not the way that should go. And plus, we do know that there's plenty of data out there that has shown that men predominantly are offered higher salaries than women. And quite frankly, Caucasians are offered higher salaries than a lot of minorities. So we wanted to remove some of that, where nobody knows what that pay history is. And we're now talking about, what are you budgeting for that position? What are you looking for? And hopefully there's more of an even playing field. Now, the pay transparency law, I'm sorry, this says 2019, and it should not say that. It should actually say 2023. So I will change that before it goes up on YouTube. But in 2023, California enacted the Pay Transparency Law, which dictates that companies have to disclose what they are paying on their postings. So interesting to know, there are 10 states that have pay transparency laws. There are 30 states that have salary history bans. And there are 13 states that right now are considering either pay transparency or salary history laws. And also note that Congress has started to look just in 2023 at the Salary Transparency Act and the Pay Equity for All Act. So I don't know where that is in Congress, but I know that it was introduced in 2023. So that should be discussed, I assume, this year. Now, a little bit more information that you need to know. It's not the same from state to state. So on the left, you're going to see the list of the 10 states that do have these pay transparency laws in effect right now, but it differs from state to state. So it may differ based on when the companies have to disclose. So some states say that you have to put it on the job listing or posting, like California. Others say that you may say that a company has to disclose it after the first interview, or they only have to disclose it upon request. That's what California had before. So when they had their salary history law in effect, that just said that at that time, they couldn't ask you what you earned in the past, but they had to give you the salary if you asked about it. They expanded that this last year. Now, some states have different things on what has to be disclosed. Some only have to disclose base salary. Some have to disclose total compensation. Some, it also differs based on whether this person is working remotely or they're going to be in office. So you have to go on the sites and see, what the laws are. So if you look down on the bottom right-hand corner, I actually have referenced 2 sites that you might want to go to find out what the laws are in certain states. So that's an easy reference. Also, there are differences based on company size. So as you know, there are a lot of different laws out there where if a company has, fewer than 5 employees, they don't have to do certain things, or if they have over 5 or over 15 or over 50, the laws change. So again, do your homework on that. Now, California companies must disclose the salary range in all job postings. Does not matter whether it is in office, remote, or hybrid. If you're in California, they have to be fully open about it. They cannot ask you about your salary history, and they must disclose salary ranges upon request or any compensation that you would ask about. So taking that a little further and going into more research, I recommend that before you are going to interview for a company or before you're going to ask for a pay raise or a promotion, that you do some homework. You might go in and look at salary calculators, go into PayScale, salary.com, Department of Labor. By the way, the Department of Labor is kind of, that's a research project. It's hard to work through that website, but they all have sites where you can put in information about the title, the level, the location, and they'll aggregate information and give you some feedback on what salaries might be in that area. I would also, though, look at sites like LinkedIn and Glassdoor, where you can research people that are in certain roles. You can find out things about certain companies and who they hire in. Glassdoor does a really good job of allowing people to talk about what they were offered for certain positions or how they see companies paying. So I would definitely look at that. I would use LinkedIn as a place to find people who are in similar roles to what you are pursuing, and I would reach out to them. So go, if you do a search on LinkedIn for people who have the title that you are pursuing, I would send them an email, and you might ask them, hey, look, I found you on LinkedIn. I noticed that you are in, such and such position. I'm not asking for personal information, but I am actively interviewing for a similar title. And maybe you disclose and say, I have heard that the positions typically pay between this amount and this amount. Could you tell me if that's the same thing you see in the market? You'd be surprised how many people will respond to that and say, well, that's a little low or that's a little high. I have several examples of people who have moved to different states and have sent out an email to somebody and said, hi, I found your profile on LinkedIn. I'm currently residing in, let's just say, California, and I'm moving to Texas. And I'm actively interviewing for positions that have the same title as you. I know that our states are different. I understand that compensation in your market might be, within this range. Could you point me in the right direction to verify if that's true? Or could you verify if that's what you've seen in the market? Or do you know that that would be, a fair salary? You'd be surprised, but people often respond to that. People do like to be helpful. So I have plenty of examples of people doing just that and getting answers back. I would also talk to recruiters. Recruiters know, the external recruiters, they know what's going on in the market. So if you are talking to a variety of recruiters, ask them, like, I know that I'm currently in this role and I'm pursuing this next role. What are you seeing as the difference in pay? Are there different components to pay that I might be looking at? So as you move up the ladder, you might have more things that you can negotiate. They can be a great resource. Again, I know this from personal experience because I was an external recruiter myself. Also keep in mind that there are differences, though, in compensation based on their industry. It could be geography. There could be a number of different little elements. So do your homework on those things as well. So word tracks. This is what I know you're all here for. You all want to really know, like, just what should I be saying? So if you are being asked, what are you looking for? What would you want? What are you hoping for? Here are some phrases that have worked very, very effectively for our clients. So you might start out with, I'm actively interviewing with companies that are offering base salaries between 150 to 170,000. So you might start out with that. And you might ask back, is that in line with what you're looking? You might say, I've been talking with companies that are offering base salaries between 150 and 170,000 plus bonus and equity with a total package of 200K. It is really important that you always know what your ultimate salary or the compensation package is that you're looking for. I call that the all-in. What is your all-in? If you've got a base, you've got bonus, and you've got equity, what are you looking for? Why that all-in is really important is because a company can sometimes be creative and find different ways to get you to that ultimate number. So you may say you're looking for 150 to 170,000, but you're looking for 200K, and they're like, well, we don't have the budget for that for 150. We're looking at like 140, but we have other components that we could be weaving into that to get you to that 200,000. So they might have different types of bonuses. They may have different types of equity. They might have other things that get built into it. So just know what that all-in number is. I also think if you are hearing or seeing a range and you want to, let them know you don't want the low end, you might say, I'm comfortable with those numbers, but I'm hoping for the high end of the range. That's setting that you don't want them to offer that 150. If you offer 150, or if they offer 150, that may not be, something that you would accept. Again, another type of phrasing, I'm hoping or expecting a salary between 75,000 and 90,000 plus a 15% bonus. I recommend trying to get as specific as you can if you feel like you have to disclose what you're looking for. But I think that you have to just I think the range is always better than a locked in number. You could say, I'm looking for a position that's paying in or around 150,000. But if you do that, I would always go back into like that all-in number. I'd like to have a base salary in or around 150,000, but ultimately I'm looking for a total package of 175 or 200,000. I find that it's very useful to say things like, I've researched. Let them know you've done your homework. I've researched what other companies are paying for similar roles, and most have a base around 130,000 with a 20 to 25% bonus. I wouldn't want to go below that because I know I'm worth it. I know people are going to probably hear that last part with the exclamation point and go, "Oh, I'm not saying that," because I hear a lot of people say, I don't like to brag or boast or kind of sound overconfident, but that's your lead in. I think you should say, I think I'm worth it. I know what I'm going to be bringing to the table. So you might want to kind of throw that in at the end. I know that there are a lot of people, especially people who are like me, a little bit older, who started working in the 90s, and we were always told, don't talk about compensation. I will tell you today, compensation is talked about much earlier, and it's not the taboo that it used to be, but some people still want to defer, and I get that. So if you want to defer talking about it, here's a word track that you could use. You could say, at this point, I prefer not to limit myself to a target amount. I'd like to continue talking about the role. And if we get to a point where you're ready to make an offer, we can discuss a fair package. If that's something that you want to do, you can do that. Just know that if this is a company that you're talking to and they're like, you know what, we are figuring out the stuff early on, they might come back and say, I totally respect that. However, it's important for us to know that we're in alignment at this point, in which case they're going to come back and ask you. Now, I would say if they come back and ask you, you could still, instead of answering them, you could come back with something like, and I fully understand that you want that. Could you share with me what you have budgeted for this position? So that might be something that you could throw in. So let's talk about how you might ask for compensation, because that kind of weaves into even what I was just saying. So I think the best way to ask, if you're like, I want to ask, I don't want to wait for them. I don't want to get to, the 11th hour and then find out that I want 150 and they're looking at, 120, and that's just never going to work. So I want to bring it up sooner. Again, I think in this market, that's okay. So if you want some word tracks, here's some openers that I would go with. I would start out with, I value open conversations about compensation. I noticed the salary range posted on the job description is 150,000 or 150 to 170,000. May I ask some questions about that? I think asking permission kind of diffuses tension a bit. So you might say, may I ask some questions about that? Can you walk me through how you came to this salary range? Now, this third point I have to talk about, because there are some egregious ranges out there. There are some companies that are not operating in the spirit of the laws of disclosing compensation. I have seen more than once companies that will put out a director position or a manager position and will give like $150,000 spread on the salary range. They'll say, oh, this position pays between 150,000 and 300,000, which is absurd. So what you might want to do if you see something like that, you might say, I value open conversations about compensation. I noticed the salary range on the job description was, 150,000 to 300,000. This is a very wide range. Could you provide me with a narrower range for someone with my expertise? And then try to pull it into where you are. I love the last bullet under this one, which is, considering California has pay transparency laws, could we talk about what you have budgeted for this role? It's a little bit of calling them on like, hey guys, you should have been disclosing this up front anyway, but this is kind of your lead in. Another approach could be, compensation is important to all of us. To me, that is like telling the recruiter or the hiring manager, whoever you're talking to, that, if you were in my shoes, you'd want to know about this too. So compensation is important to all of us. In the interest of making sure we're all on the same page or not too far off, could you share with me what you're looking to pay for this role? Or compensation is important to all of us. When would be an appropriate time for us to talk about the salary range and other components of compensation? That kind of, again, says, I'd really like to talk about this, and then you can see how that leads in. So key things I want you to remember when you're thinking of compensation is, first, learn what the market's paying. Do your research, do your homework, talk to people. Don't go into it without having a sense of what's the reality out in the market, because what the market is bearing is what you should be paid. And that's what you want to go with. Always go in with that win-win mindset. This is a conversation. They want to hire the best person. They want to fill this job. You want this job. This is a win-win conversation. When we talk about compensation, it's really about like, hey, you want to hire me, right? So let's talk about what this could look like. Stay objective, but always ask your questions with curiosity, not suspicion. That's something that you might have to practice a little bit, but making sure that the tone comes off right. Use data to support your position or case. Talk about what you have done. Talk about what the market is paying. Talk about what you're seeing out there. So use that data. Don't disclose your past salary. Always go for the high number. Never say your lowest number, because just think about this. Candidates always hear the high number of the range. Companies always hear the low number you said. So never give out your lowest number. Always be a few thousand above that. Know what your all-in number is and always state your worth. So back it up with who you are, what you're going to bring to the table. All right. So that is what we wanted to present today. We are going to go into questions in just a moment. So if you are watching this live, we're going to start the Q&A session momentarily. For those of you who are watching this on replay, thank you for tuning in. You can click the link in the description below and sign up for future Just Ask Julia sessions.